Hello, denizens of the internet. I'm Evelyn Silver, author of the Bloodwine Chronicles series, including the award-winning Best LGBTQ Book of 2022, Witch's Night, and the upcoming book Midnight Fear, to be released April 10th, 2024. It's been a while since I made a video, but I felt inspired to record one of my blog posts as a video, and here we are. So, how to write Jewish characters, a general guide. Before I get into this topic, I just want to say, do not come into the comments with anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or politics. This is strictly about how to write Jewish characters. Existing as Jewish or having Jewish heritage and culture is not a political statement, nor is it an invitation to political debate, and I don't want to deal with that stuff here. I'm willing to talk to personal friends about things, but I don't owe random strangers that energy. On to the topic at hand. Buckle up, people, this is gonna be a long one. I was doing some thinking and revisiting the decision to make my main character in my novel, Sarai, a Jew. Not in thinking about changing it, but about why I made her Jewish in the first place. From a standpoint of trying to sell more books, it's more likely to alienate some potential readers than it is to draw them in. And since my book isn't about religion or religious experiences, other than some slightly funny moments where Sarai worries about vampires around her and her own decision to try to keep kosher, blood definitely not being kosher, there's no need for her to be Jewish. It's not a Jewish story. But there is a need. That need is for visibility, for representation, to provide a well-rounded counter to goblin bankers drawn from anti-Semitic tropes and greedy villains with large hook noses. Anti-Semitism, like any other form of bigotry, flourishes in the demonization of the other. When all you see is a harmful stereotype, it is easier to forget that someone is human. So, this is a video about writing Jewish characters by someone who had 12 years of Jewish education and came from a Jewish home and culture, recorded in the hopes that more people will make fully human Jewish characters. Or werewolves or fae, you do you. So first, what is a Jew? Many people think that Jews are a religious group, and that's accurate, sort of. Judaism is a religion. It's also several ethnicities, it's a culture, it's a choice, it's all the above, it's some of the above. There are religious Jews, secular Jews, even atheist Jews. There are converts, there are those who've been Jewish for generations. To write your character, you need to know where they come from and who they are, how that informs their culture and their outlook on life. Before I do a deep dive into culture, I want to divert to an extremely important point. Please be aware of harmful tropes. Be very aware of tropes. In my opinion, this is particularly important to those writing fantasy where there aren't explicit religions, ethnicities, and groups from our world, but also applies to any genre of fiction. The most harmful trope of all is probably the myth of blood libel. This is from medieval times when it was wrongly believed that Jews killed Christian babies to use their blood to make matzah. For the record, matzah is a type of very bland cracker that is made with literally just water and flour. It is very boring, and I have no idea how it got so twisted in this myth. Somehow, this myth still exists in modern versions and modern times, and has influenced the fictional creation of everything from hook-nosed witches eating babies to blood-drinking Dracula and his brides. Now, you might be thinking, I'd never write a story where Jewish people ate babies, that's ridiculous! But you might write a European-based fantasy world. You have to have a conflict, so you add in a secret cabal of large-nosed scary villains controlling the world's wealth who kidnap children for their life force or blood for dark magic, and your hero has to fight this evil group to save all those innocent kids. That's not me making a plot up. That is the plot to Hogwarts Legacy. It's also nothing more than straight-up blood libel with a different skin. Don't do this, or any variations of this. This is not just me choosing to view Jews as evil goblins. This is me viewing modern media through a lens informed by historical tropes. It's important to note a Jewish character does not have to be Jewish to be a Jewish character, if that makes sense. To draw a parallel, Alina in Netflix's interpretation of Shadow and Bone isn't half Asian because Asia doesn't exist in that world. She's half Shu. But let's be real here, she's half Asian. You might not explicitly say that your evil group is Jewish because, of course, Judaism and Christianity don't exist in your fantasy world. And maybe you're even nice enough not to give them big noses. But the background is there whether you want to acknowledge it or not. The tropes you're drawing on have history and are saturated with the trauma of real people. You are causing real harm to real people by playing off these tropes because it reinforces the notion of Jewish stereotypes as outsiders and as monstrous. Real people have been murdered for this trope, and if you choose to use it or play into it in any way after knowing the harm it has done historically, then you are guilty of perpetuating anti-Semitism and of being an uncreative writer incapable of thinking up something new and better. Be a good writer. Not only does a story with the secret baby sacrificing cabal play into the blood libel myth, but it also plays into another harmful trope that somehow Jews control the world through a secret society. I'm still waiting for my invitation/check, but I'll let you know if I ever get one. Spoiler alert, it doesn't exist. That trope came about as a way to scapegoat a minority of outsiders. If you thought the group of outsiders who dressed funny, came from a weird place far away, had weird customs, and spoke a strange Middle Eastern language somehow were responsible for all the bad things in your life, instead of the king or current tyrant, you'd be more likely to go murder that group than you would be to overthrow and murder the king, which plays into the king's favor and would be something those actually in power would promote. So perhaps, in your fantasy world, maybe it's actually the perfect kind-faced monarch trying to pass the blame for the blood ritual murders onto an easy scapegoat while amassing more personal power and control? That has the bonus of being a more interesting storyline anyway. Another less murder-related trope is the greedy trope. This can show up as a literal greedy character exploiting underlings for money, such as Fagin in Oliver Twist, or as a fantasy race of large-nosed banker goblins. I know, I already took a shot at JKR, but it's just so easy to do. Okay, let's talk about goblins first. On its face, you can see goblins as an interesting fantasy creature and draw on previously established fantasy stories for a fun side note in your world building. Honestly, growing up, I didn't notice it until someone pointed it out to me, but they are heavily influenced in function and design by stereotypes of greedy Jews. They could honestly be switched out with some Nazi propaganda without any real difference. The greedy Jew trope came from the fact that in the Middle Ages, Jews were forbidden from owning land and from most good professions. Jews couldn't be farmers, they couldn't be blacksmiths, they couldn't be masons. But because Christians were forbidden for religious reasons from being moneylenders, hey, there was an opening for Jews to have a profession. And everyone needs a profession because we need to eat. So, a lot of Jews got into a trade that Christians deemed immoral for themselves, leading to more vilification and the greedy stereotype, because obviously anyone who chooses to handle money must be doing it out of greed. So, don't make greedy Jewish characters whose whole deal is scheming about how to get more money, or use caricatures that look like 1940s German propaganda to populate your fantasy banks. It's tired, unimaginative, and harmful. Now, a note on this. There is a bit of truth in my experience to the frugal stereotype in some situations. However, you have to be very careful about how you write a frugal Jewish character and understand where that frugality comes from. Frugality is, and always has been, a survival mechanism. During the Holocaust, frugality in rationing things like food and money were key to survival for a lot of people. You can compare this to the learned behaviors of those who experienced the Great Depression in America in the 1930s. Frugality is a trauma response. So, while people in my generation might have no problem spending a little extra because they feel like a new pair of shoes, my grandma, a Holocaust survivor who lost everything and everyone as a child, might only buy oranges at one specific location because they're 12 cents cheaper there. From her perspective, if you need to flee suddenly or bribe someone into sparing your life, you do not want to be short on cash because you wasted your money on oranges. But enough about that. I've told you all about what not to do, but what should you do? What does good Jewish representation look like? If you've read or listened to my other How to Write So-and-So blog posts, then you know where this is going. Just write a well-rounded character. That's always the trick. Whether you're writing specific gender, LGBTQ plus characters, POC characters, or whatever insert minority here character you've got in mind. Make them a full person. Give them hopes and dreams and flaws and hobbies and families and friends. Making a character a full person will usually help pull you away from relying on harmful tropes. There's a lot of stories with great Jewish representation out there in fiction, but all the ones I can think of off the top of my head right now while I'm writing this are stories that revolve around Judaism or grappling with religion in some way. I don't want to focus this post on writing Jewish stories or religious stories. I want to see more stories that happen to have Jewish characters. It's kind of like how LGBTQ people and people of color are tired of stories that center on their trauma or on their identity as the whole point of the story. Are Holocaust novels good and needed? Yes, absolutely. Would I like to read about a modern Jewish woman dealing with the emotional turmoil of deciding whether she should become a vampire to have eternity with her immortal lover if it means breaking the laws of kashrut because blood drinking is involved, and also a lot of other stuff is going on in her life? Yes, absolutely, please. So just write good characters. A key part of writing a Jewish character is knowing a bit about what they personally value, as this will guide their motivations. In my experience, Jewish communities put a lot of value on education and family. To prepare my Goy husband for meeting my extended family, I told him to watch My Big Fat Greek Wedding. It's not a Jewish family, but really they might as well be in a lot of ways. Loudness, food, insular community, these things aren't required in your Jewish character crafting, but it's been my personal experience in real life. I think valuing education and family are pretty universal things for a lot of cultures, not just Jewish culture, so this shouldn't be a stretch for anyone to figure out how to write. A character might also be trying to throw off cultural pressures, which could lead to them having opposing primary values. Depending on what religious background your Jewish character comes from, there may also be a lot of emphasis on preserving tradition. Yes, Fiddler on the Roof's tradition is a perfect example of this. There's lots of different sects with different emphasis on traditions, but the main four that you'll likely write about are Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, or Reconstructionist. All have their own way of preserving and valuing culture and tradition. For example, at Orthodox Jewish services at a synagogue, men and women will be seated separately, divided by a curtain called a mechitza. There will be no use of anything electronic. At a Reconstructionist, the genders sit mixed, and you might hear a rabbi and cantor use a microphone and a guitar. All are Jewish in their own valid ways. But there's of course bickering and stuff, different levels of strictness within the rules. If you don't already know about all this, I highly recommend Googling it to figure out your character's background. If you're writing a fantasy world, these values can shape what the Judaism stand-in might look like, as values are what truly shape a person and a culture. Just a quick need-to-know note about naming your character. Jews almost never name a baby after a living relative or person, only deceased ones. It's kind of a bad luck taboo. So you will never have Moshe Sr. and Moshe Jr., but little baby Moshe might be named after his great-great-grandpa Moshe. Part of crafting a character is what they look like. So first, I'll address the most common stereotypical depiction. Yes, some Jews have larger noses. There is a way to look Jewish, but it is far from universal, as I'll discuss further here. I would recommend that unless you're writing from your own personal experience and can add that extra nuance, don't linger on this physical trait too much. For example, I'm Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, and Celtic, and I have a small nose, so I don't focus on noses when I write. Instead, my description of my main character Sarai, who is Sephardic, Mizrahi, and Germanic, focuses on olive skin tone, a wild mane of very thick golden brown curls, and stunning brown eyes. For your reference, I modeled her after a picture of a singer I found while Googling for reference material, pictured here. The terms I mentioned, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, and Sephardic, are ethnic and cultural groups within the Jewish community. While Judaism is a religion, it is sort of an ethno-religion, as there are ethnic groups within the religion, though one could of course be part of these ethnic groups and not be Jewish, or not be part of these groups and be a Jew, usually due to conversion. What group your Jewish character comes from will influence what they look like. Ashkenazi Jews are the largest group, especially in diaspora places like North America, and are most often represented in Western media. We're the ones whose families spent the most time in Europe, and so are usually the palest Jews, though being considered white is a more modern phenomenon. Depending on what time period you're writing for, they will not be considered white if they are not modern Jews. While I'm so pale that I'm practically see-through, we were considered separate from the European white populations and do have old Middle Eastern roots. I might have a Romanian grandpa, but Romanians consider him a Jew first, not a Romanian. Ashkenazim come from Poland, Germany, France, Lithuania, and all over Europe, really. There is a typical Jewish look, for example, see Barbra Streisand, but this is far from universal. Ashkenazi Jews can have blonde, red hair, brunette, black hair, can have ice blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, or any color eyes. I have gray-blue eyes. If your character is Ashkenazi from modern times, their family will likely have endured, escaped, or was in some way affected by the Holocaust, which is something to consider if your character's grandma or grandpa shows up. Sephardic Jews are another large group, though not as well represented as Ashkenazim in media. They come from the Jews who were expelled from Spain during the Inquisition, then migrated all over. They can be Hispanic Jews, and I've known many who've come from South America. They also settled along the Mediterranean and have vibrant cultures all the way from Morocco to Iraq. Their looks vary accordingly, and the key word is vary. Some can have brown skin, straight black hair, dark eyes. Some can have curly thick hair, lighter skin, green eyes. Most of the Sephardic people I've known lean toward a more typical Middle Eastern look, but that's just been my experience with a small community. If your Jewish character is Sephardic, you'll want to figure out where they come from, as a Sephardic Iraqi Jew will have some interesting family history and will look very different from a Sephardic Brazilian Jew. Also totally unrelated, but Sephardic Jews have the best food. Sure, Ashkenazim have matzo ball soup and babka, but wow, Sephardic food. Seriously, it's amazing. I once got the privilege of having dinner at a Sephardic Moroccan Jewish home, and I will remember that meal forever. Not going into food as a cultural thing right now, but that's also something you should look up for your character, as comfort food is always important, especially in Jewish culture, where Bubby loves to say, "You're too thin, eat." Anyway, moving on. Mizrahi Jews are from a lot of the same places as Sephardic Jews, as they come from Middle Eastern regions. Historically, they've been the descendants of Jews from Western Asian countries, think the Stans, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, etc., and close regions, and also North African countries from Morocco to Egypt to Iraq. They have a lot in common with Sephardic Jews and are often conflated together. While I'm technically Mizrahi, my family is primarily Ashkenazi and follow Ashkenazi customs, so I can't speak to Mizrahi customs and culture on a personal level. My understanding is that Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews have many of the same customs and traditions, with the only real difference being that Sephardic origins are those who were expelled from Spain hundreds of years ago during the Inquisition, while Mizrahi Jews are those who have been in the Middle East for literally thousands of years. The two groups, being in the same region since then, have mingled a lot. There are lots of other groups of Jewish minorities within these three groups, and outside as well. There's Yemeni Jews, who everybody associates with their elaborate traditional wedding garb and beautiful artwork, very rich cultural history, and a lot of hardship. A famous Yemeni Jew was Ofra Haza, a singer who has some great music, and on a more mainstream level you might recognize as the mom Yocheved in the Prince of Egypt DreamWorks movie. Ethiopian Jews, aka the Black Jews, with also a lot of history and sometimes unwarranted prosecution, are notable for being cut off from Jewish communities and therefore not having the same focus on the oral tradition known as the Talmud that many other Jewish communities study and incorporate. Musta'arabi Jews are one of three groups of Jews from the Old Yishuv, aka the Jewish community that was part of the modern land of Israel pre-1900s, and are mostly categorized as Mizrahi. While Sephardim came to the land after the Inquisition, and Ashkenazim, I believe, began immigrating in the 17 or 1800s, the Musta'arabi, aka the Jews who are Arabic, but not actually Arab, more assimilated to Arab culture around them, They were living there since the fall of the Second Temple and before. This group has since blended with other minorities, such as Sephardic and Mizrahi, and are no longer a distinct group, though their descendants still thrive. But if you're writing from an older time period, this would be the group to research depending on where your story takes place. For example, if you're writing about any of the Crusades, these would be the Jews encountered living among the Arabs at the time. Consult Wikipedia for more information. There's Russian Jews, Bukharan Jews, Malabar Jews, Koshin Jews. Unique cultures and whole languages are different all over the place. There's Yiddish from the Ashkenazim, Ladino from Sephardics, and a variety of Judeo-Arabic language, as well as distinct dialects like Yemenite Hebrew. In modern times, modern Hebrew is the most commonly spoken Jewish language, with Torah Hebrew and Aramaic kind of being like Shakespearean in comparison. With other languages like Yiddish and Ladino waning in popularity and speakers becoming endangered languages. So, while a modern Ashkenazi character's grandparents might be called Bubby and Zaidi and bicker fluently in Yiddish, the main character might only know a handful of insults. It is a very colorful language. A Sephardic character would not speak Yiddish, they would speak Ladino, and that is a distinction that needs to be made. Mixing and intermarriage between Jewish ethnic groups is fairly common throughout history and especially in modern times, so if writing for the present, it is entirely possible to have a character who is, for example, Iraqi, Yemeni, French, and Russian, and their appearance can be very mixed. Of course, there have been moments of friction between cultural and ethnic groups. If what you're writing might include that, a movie you might enjoy as part of your research is called Casablanca, a 1973 Hebrew musical about a Moroccan Mizrahi Jew who falls in love with a European Ashkenazi Jew. It's sort of an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, aka West Side Story. I haven't seen it since high school, but I remember it being pretty fun and an interesting look at culture clashes and racism faced by brown-skinned Jews. If you want to know about racism faced in modern times in various places, I suggest doing research on your own. This is already a long video, and that is a topic worthy of a whole extra video and then some. And you should also be asking someone who is not as pale as me. Another influence on how your character will look is clothing. All these different groups have beautiful traditional clothing traditions and cultures, which may influence how your character presents themselves. For example, you can't just slap a kippah, also known as a yarmulke, on a Jewish character's head. They're traditionally worn by men only, so if a woman or a non-binary character wears one, you can see that they're bucking tradition and actively making a choice to be more progressive, while also displaying that their heritage is important to them, or their spirituality is important to them. The type of kippah is also influenced by culture. For example, a black velvet kippah might mean that someone is Hasidic or Haredi, which are specific groups of Ashkenazi Jews with more orthodox leaning. A Bukharan kippah might be worn by a Sephardic Jew, but also sometimes Reform Jews and others who just think they look nice or are more liberal-minded. A small kippah with a Pokemon design might be a souvenir from a themed bar mitzvah, or just a fun novelty expressing personality. More religious characters will wear a kippah at all times, while less religious characters might only wear them during religious services, prayers, or events. Depending on how religious a character's background is, they might be more modest. A woman might not want to show her shoulders or wear a skirt above the knee. Or they might be a modern teenager who wears a bikini to the beach. Some Orthodox women cover their hair, particularly after they're married, with a wig or a wrap called a tichel or a mipachat, in the name of modesty, not dissimilar to Muslim women who choose to wear a hijab. There are specific religious articles of clothing, such as a tzitzit for men, that should be considered if your character is more religious. But your average conservative, and please note that this does not correlate with political conservative leanings, it has strictly to do with religious practice, average Reform and average Reconstructionist Jew likely won't wear a tzitzit, though sometimes a conservative Jew might. Alright, enough about clothes. Let's circle back to food. Food is more than just comfort, it is a lifestyle, and I do think I need to touch on that to get to how your Jewish character lives. The laws of kashrut are more extensive than just Jews don't eat pork, though that is a part of it. The rule is basically don't eat mammals that don't chew their cud and have split hooves. There's also rules about poultry and fish, as well as a rule regarding dairy and meat. The meat and dairy rule technically states you shouldn't eat a calf boiled in its mother's milk, or something to that effect. So someone who's more orthodox will have 2 full sets of kitchen dishes, appliances, and sinks sometimes to keep meat and anything like chicken that uses meat utensils separate from anything that might touch dairy to avoid cross-contamination. This isn't just cross-contamination in, like, a gluten allergy type way. It refers to a spiritual impurity type of cross-contamination. Actually, hold that. They'll have 4 sets total of dishes. 2 sets for everyday meat and dairy, then 2 more for Passover that they'll switch out, because Passover has its own avalanche of kosher rules. If you keep kosher on an Orthodox level, you will wait 6 hours if you eat meat before eating dairy, but I believe the rule is after 1 hour you can eat meat after eating dairy. Growing up conservative, we waited an hour instead of 6, and a half hour instead of 1 hour at my house. Reform might not wait at all, or even mix meat and dairy. I personally used a loophole for my guilty pleasure of chicken parm at Italian restaurants. The rule says nothing about chicken, technically. More religious Jews will only eat at approved kosher restaurants and need to bring their own lunch with them when they go to visit non-Jews, while others might keep kosher only in the house but eat KFC when they're out and about, or eat non-kosher food on paper plates in the house to avoid cross-contamination of the kosher plates. Keeping kosher in the house growing up wasn't a difficult thing for me because it was just normal, it was part of how I lived. It was annoying sometimes, like if I wanted ice cream after a chicken dinner and I had to wait an hour, but I didn't see it as an inconvenience. It's just how life was. As an adult, I don't keep kosher anymore, and the biggest difference for me is being able to put my meat and dairy dishes together in the same dishwasher. My parents would make us hand wash all the meat dishes because the dishwasher was dairy, which was gross, particularly after Shabbat dinners on Friday nights. Shabbat and how it's religiously observed is another thing you should think about for your character, but this video is long enough as it is. So do your own research with Shabbat rules and which denominations might follow what rules in what way. The degree to how much your character keeps or doesn't keep kosher will influence your story anytime food is brought up. Those who are more religious will have to figure out if the food is kosher or to what degree it might be acceptable if it's not fully kosher, aka chicken that hasn't been killed in a specifically humane way and blessed by a rabbi isn't kosher, but it's still a kosher animal, so the character might let that slide, while pork and shellfish are absolutely not kosher and they might not accept that at all, or they might have their one guilty pleasure non-kosher food. My mom's is lobster. Shh. There's lots more to the rules, all of which you can find online. My goal here was to present how it's influenced me and some of my friends growing up in our daily lives, depending on how religious we were, and how you can apply that to your writing. In conclusion, without going to even more elaborate details on what you should Google in your own time as part of your research, this should be a pretty good base for writing yourself a Jewish character. Wikipedia can help with the rest. It might not seem like much to some people, or maybe it doesn't seem like it's important, but the media we consume is vital to the health of our society. If it's full of harmful stereotypes, it harms our society as a whole. There have been a lot of harmful tropes and stereotypes out there that fuel hatred and bigotry, and now it's time to fix these things. In Judaism, there's a concept called tikkun olam, which translates literally to fixing the world. It's the idea that you should help others, help society, help mend, and help grow. When you add to the world, you want the world to be improved for having that addition. So when you write stories, try to make them part of tikkun olam. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe and ring the bell to catch future videos and show your support. Be sure to check me out on my website and various social media accounts to learn more about my novels, featuring a Jewish witch falling for vampires you'll love if you love this video. Au revoir, lehitraot v'shalom. Have a fantastic night.